the ASOP vehicle retrieval system. Please visit us again.
Let's check out some videos here with me, myself, and I.
If you don't like this next guest, if you don't value what we're bringing to the table, if you don't understand what this means, all right, for people on libertarian forums, you. If you don't understand what this means for Bitcoiners and anarcho atheists and all the people that we know and love, if you don't appreciate what's about to happen, you. And I mean that. I mean that from a place of love. You. Okay, go ahead.
From a grandfather clock that stopped during a crime, calibrated inside a fallout shelter that passed inspection, this is the Sam Hyde Show. Tonight, we examine the psychology of men who are always almost done. Investigate the federal agency that regulates how silence is used in advertising, and speak with a man who's been training for an emergency he won't describe. And now, your host is what type is considered a spoiler, Sam Hyde.
The Sam Hyde Show.
Welcome to the Sam Hyde Show. We're having some technical difficulties right now. You may see some flickering on the screen. That's not my problem, all right? I need to pay for this. Voice actor's tip. A tart green apple will get your mouth tangy. What's the big idea? You saw him coming back on the computer and you thought we weren't going to get him? Are you retarded? Are you a bonehead? You that loco en de cabeza. I'm not gonna kill you. I'm just gonna hurt you really, really bad. Ladies and gentlemen, Stefan Molyneux. I'm back in the saddle again. I'm back in the saddle again. The two people clapping sounds more pathetic. Don't do it. Back in the saddle again. You don't understand, man. I've been waiting for this moment. Sorry. Please let me have peace. Please let me die in peace. That's a show record right there. controversial cultural commentary, and more recently for focusing on family, parenting, and what it actually means to live a moral life in a collapsing civilization. Some call him Stefan, Steph, Molyneux. Personally, I call him Hero. Ladies and gentlemen, Stefan Molyneux. Thank you for being here, Steph.
Thank you for the invite and the very kind words. Thank you.
This is a paid advertisement for Chalk. You're going to sit there and listen. It's 30 seconds long. This is a good company, so we're doing a serious ad. I talked to the CEO on the phone and had a good conversation. This stuff is made in America with American customer service. The ingredients are hot water purified. They're third-party tested. This is a high-quality supplement. I did feel a boost with this. The point is not take this and become a different man by Thursday. The point is support. Energy support, drive support, stress response support, recovery. And it honestly feels better than placebo. That's as hard of an endorsement as I'm willing to give, but it is realistic. And that's more than you can say for a lot of these things, man. Go to chalk.com. That's CHOQ.com. Use code SAM for 35% off. I feel like there's a good chance that our viewers are not necessarily familiar with your work. I think you've got a very interesting and important sort of overview on how these kind of complicated ideas fit together. Is it too much to ask for you to sort of lay it out for us?
Yeah,
That's
no,
kind of heavy to start off with, but I want people to get right into it here.
I appreciate the boiled down challenge. That's always exciting. So, philosophically speaking, come out of the Aristotelian tradition.
What's that mean?
Objective reality exists independently of our consciousness. That reason is our tool to understand the world, to understand the nature of the universe. There are two general schools of thought in philosophy. One is that we start with kind of nothing and we get our knowledge from our senses, right? So I know that I'm here talking to you because I took a plane, I took a cab, and we're sitting in the chair opposite from each other talking, right? So that's how I know that this is occurring. How do I know it's not a dream? Well, we can sort of get into that. So we start with very little, and we build our knowledge based upon sense data. Because, you know, we're actually in a skull prison. Like, our brains don't contact the real world. Like, our brains don't listen, our brains don't see. They just get a bunch of electrical impulses. In a matrix style, like we could be a brain in a tank, sort of as an old Cartesian argument. So the Aristotelian side of things, could be called the objectivist side of things, is that we start with very little, we build our knowledge up based upon what comes in through the evidence of the senses.
Okay, and this is what you believe.
This is what is true.
And the alternative is?
So the alternative view is sort of a mystical view. We start with kind of this perfect knowledge before we're born. So for Plato, we were sort of souls floating in an ideal world. He called it the forms with a capital F. It's like philosophy with a capital F. And the forms, so we saw this perfect microphone, we saw this perfect chair, we saw this perfect table, we saw this perfect Sam Hyde, if he could be improved upon. We saw all these perfect things, and then we were born. And how do we know what things are? Because we have this memory of all this perfect stuff we saw before we were born, that we start with perfect knowledge, and then we have to kind of regain that. I know this sounds very abstract, but really profound impacts on how we view the world.
What would Catholicism be?
So Catholicism and all religions says that there's a perfect world of ideal forms far beyond our consciousness and far beyond our senses, and that the reality of the universe, correct me if I'm wrong in my theology, I'm not exactly a theologian, but the ideal of the universe is the immaterial. God, the soul, the commandments, the morals, heaven, hell, things which we can't experience through the evidence of our senses. We can't touch, taste, smell, we can't interrogate them, we can't ask them directly, we can pray and see what we get back. But the essence of life is the immaterial, and in particular in Catholicism, you know, there's an old quote from Shakespeare, you know, but to the girdle do the gods inherit, below is all the fiends, like the waist down, the sexual impulse, the body is the devil's, and this is the realm of devilish, physical, fleshly temptations, lust, greed, gluttony, overeating, and so on. To escape, in a religion as a whole and Catholicism in particular, that the purpose of life is not the material. The purpose of life is the immaterial and the ideal, which we can't directly experience. Now,
I felt a pang of guilt when he said overeating.
we've all been there. It's just past Christmas. We've all been there.
I feel personally attacked by that. Rivera, the first part of what he said, does that hold true, or is this...
No, I was surprised because from my knowledge, and I'm not a theologian either, but one of the misunderstandings is that we're just a husk and that like the material world is like evil and bad. That could be a evangelical or Protestant sort of thing. I'm not familiar with, but I think that is like a heresy to think that everything physical is evil and wrong and to escape it, because we are meant to.
Well, no, because the body is the creation of God, for
Right.
sure. So it's not that everything, the material, is evil, but the flesh tends to pull us down towards the baser lusts. Like all the 7 deadly sins are all based upon the body, to a large part, mostly based upon the body. So it's the idea that our soul yearns for heaven, but in a sense our body pulls us down to the more base and the less divine, the less perfect, the less immaterially wonderful.
I heard something recently that was interesting, and it was that we don't actually yearn for anything evil truly. Like we do bad things because we see a lesser good in them that's attractive. We're under the impression that it's good, but it's just like a lesser good and something more fleeting and temporal. But
It's a transient physical good, usually, right? So the devil would generally tempt you with, the lust, the gluttony, and so on, the physical temptations, the temptations of physical pleasure. And it's not that Catholicism is against all physical pleasures, but in excess, and Aristotle would agree with that too, but in excess they tend to, like lust, will take you away from marriage, pair bonding, and procreation, have you do, empty sex to wreck your pair bonding, to be promiscuous. And of course, as we know, the more sex, the fewer babies. It's one of these weird paradoxes of the modern world. So an excess of physical lust. Of course, you need to eat in order to survive. If you eat too little, you die. If you eat too much, you die. And Aristotle's got this lovely Aristotelian mean where a lot of things you kind of need to be in the middle. Like courage is good. Too little courage and you're a coward, but too much courage, you're just running into gunfire and dying. Right? And so I've sort of tried to live my life with a balance of courage, which means you get called foolhardy by the cowardly and a coward by the foolhardy. It is that our flesh, the physical, there's no such thing as too much piety, but there's just such a thing as too much pursuit of physical pleasures, and that tends to obscure and obstruct, like an eclipse, right? Like me putting my hand in front of the light here. It's a way of dragging us away from the divine, which is really the purpose of our life, is to live in a holy manner so that we can rejoin God after death.
Sure. Are you saying you agree with that?
No.
Okay.
yeah, and I know that our idea of heaven is that we'll be.
Let's not get too deep into that. First, the main distinction is between only having the data that comes from your sense organs and having to build up from there versus there's a world, there's stuff outside of us that's imperceptible, that is, it doesn't exist in this physical reality in the measurable or observable
And it's more
way.
important.
And is what?
More important.
Yes.
It's more important.
And you agree with, you're the first camp. You do not agree with the second thing. You don't believe in any kind of higher power, anything outside of observable physical reality.
Hey, as a philosopher, I'm down with abstractions and concepts and universals. Logic doesn't exist, right? It's not like something like this chair. Logic doesn't exist. The truth is not a tangible thing. It's a relationship between the ideas in our mind and what we're describing in reality. So I'm very keen on abstractions. It's just that abstractions cannot go against the evidence of the senses, and they can't go against empirical reason. So the way that I formulate it is that all concepts are imperfectly derived from sense data. I know that sounds a little technical, so what I mean by that is if we have an idea about the world and it contradicts what actually comes through the evidence of the senses and reason, it's wrong. And that's basic science, right? So if you have a conjecture or hypothesis in science, what happens in the world contradicts that, then your conjecture is just wrong. And so our ideas have to follow the evidence of the senses and reason. Reason is derived from the evidence of the senses.
Reason is derived from the evidence of the senses?
Sure.
Can you break that down for us?
The evidence of the senses is absolute and non-contradictory. If you have a ball, it is a ball and not a ball and an elephant. It is not a ball and the opposite of a ball. If you drop something from your hand, it doesn't go down, sideways, up at the same time. What we get through the evidence of the senses is perfectly consistent, unless something is wrong with our senses or we're crazy.
Well, I would say, what about, is it possible to have reason in the absence of sense data? For example, some sort of, person that's blind and retarded but has some inner workings in their mind. And also, second of all, people who have, something like synesthesia or these things where disorders where their sense data that they're getting is, we know it is up.
Two things that float into my head to respond to that. The first is we do have some evidence of what the mind is like prior, like when sense data is completely limited. We think of people like Helen Keller or other people, deaf, blind, and dumb, although not dumb being like mute, not dumb as an unintelligent.
Shouldn't
And
beat her
her
ass
description, her description of her mind before she got evidence of the senses given to her by her teacher was just this a completely blind chaos of nothingness, and everything was just transient and nothing made any sense. So you can't get reason without the evidence of the senses. For the people who have, 10% of the male population is colorblind. I remember when I was a user interface designer in the software world, I had to remember that 10%. So that doesn't mean that the universe is only black and white to them, but color to us. It just means that there are colors that they can't perceive in the same way that we can't hear certain frequencies or we can't see infrared and so on. So that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with our senses. They're limited for sure, but everything that they do provide to us is still perfectly consistent. And if, when you were a kid, you probably saw this thing like you have a cup of water, right? And you put a pencil in it, right? And the pencil looks like it's doing a little dog leg, like it's doing an L-shaped thing, right? And you say, well, that's weird. But if you run your finger down the pencil, it's straight. So it's the eye, like the eye is just, the image of the pencil is changing because of the refraction of the water. The water's acting as a kind of lens. So we have more than one sense so that we can validate and verify the senses. So if you and I were doing the opposite of, in this piss cold warehouse, if we were doing the opposite of that and we were in the desert, right? And I say, Sam, look at that beautiful lake on the horizon. And you'd say, Steph, well, first you'd cough off your lung up, and then you'd say, Steph, that could be a mirage. And I'm like, no, come on, it's hot, let's go.
I'd say let's go to that lake.
Let's go swim, man, there's gonna be
Gotta
kicks.
go see
It's
that
gonna be,
lake,
right?
bro.
And so if we get there and we dive and we drink and we bathe or whatever, then we're gonna say, first of all, that's all in slow motion with lots of Grecian oil.
Yeah.
But we'd also say, okay, it's a real lake. Because all of our senses are saying the same thing. If, however, we walk there and there's nothing but sand and then there's just another pretend lake, we know it's just a mirage, right? So we can validate faulty senses or senses that are giving us some data with the evidence of other senses. But if all of our senses are saying the same thing and it conforms with reason, there's no higher standard of truth that we can get a hold of.
Psst. Hey, Goyam, come here. I'm about to give you some secret insider info. It's the Diary of Sam Frank. Uh-oh, let's read it together. Freecash.com. Freecash is an online rewards platform. Small dudes, speed this up to 5x. I tried out this platform and already cashed out.
Even though I was skeptical at first, I am enjoying.
Freecast.com.
It's really easy and really fun.
Guys, you sign up for Free Cash, and you're going to be getting paid to play games. There's a variety of offers, games, surveys, and apps you can take. It's easy to use, and you get fast payouts. Bomba-clot!
This website is awesome.
Anybody who uses this should be
Extremely excited.
Because they are going to be rich.
Is he earning more than me? Is he? Oh, man, Ryan's earning more than me? Now it's a contest to see to earn more. Come on. Fuck. 2 limes, 2 J's. We got 0.2, 2 J's. Ah! $10. Yo, everybody should try this. Now let's just go through the cashing out process. It's that easy. Got the cash. Okay. If you guys don't go to freecash.com, I'm going to
Be very disappointed.
You were a
Friend who I love.
You exist to be.
Earning money by playing video games, YOLOing and getting quick payouts.
Do you understand? You're a gamer at freecash.com. It's
Really fun.
অপ্রাসঙ্গিক কথা বলা যেটা হয় এই অপ্রাসঙ্গিক কথাগুলো আপনি দয়া করে এক্সপান্ড করবেন
Are you tired of being broke, Goyim? Freecash.com.
The good of society. So this would be an example of the difference between Aristotelianism and Platonism. So in Aristotelianism, the individual exists. Only the individual exists. If you have a crowd, it's a description of a group of people. The individual people, they all exist. The crowd does not exist. The collective name for it does not exist. So you look at a forest, you say, oh, that's a beautiful forest. You know, some German hillscape of pine trees or whatever. So it's a beautiful forest, right? Each individual tree exists. The forest is a concept. The concept exists in our mind as a descriptor of a group of trees, but it doesn't exist. And the reason why this is important, Sam, is that when they say the social good that you have to sacrifice yourself for, there's no such thing as the social good. There's the good of individuals, but there's no such thing as the social good. Collectives are used to crush you because you're told, well, there's a larger good, a greater good, a social good, a country good. You have to sacrifice yourself for the nation or the tribe. And so if the concepts are more important than the individuals get crushed and ground under by these giant concepts that don't exist.
Is it not possible to have a collective descriptor like a nation or a race that functions positively to protect the people that descriptor contains?
Yes, but like all powers, it gets corrupted. So you could say, oh, well, we have this tribe and we've got to do things for the good of the tribe. But because there is no good of the tribe, and this sort of comes back to the religious question, right? If you could talk to the good of the tribe, let's just say one guy, his name is Good, and he's the good of the tribe, and you can say, okay, is this good for the tribe? You could cross-examine him and so on. But the good of the tribe, because it doesn't exist, you need an elite class of people to tell you what the good of the tribe is, and then they can make you do stuff for the good of the tribe. Think of the First World War. Well, to save civilization, it's the war to end all war. You've got to go and march off into gunfire or get shot by your sergeant if you don't put your head over the side of the trench. So because the good of the tribe, the good of the nation, the good of the group does not exist, you need people who say, oh, I know what that is. Like, oh, I know what the good of the group is. And of course, what does it always turn out to be? That the good of the group said by some guy is always, always, always the good of the ruling class, is the good of the people in charge, what's best. If people are going to say, this is the good, I need to be able to interrogate it. I need to be able to cross-examine it. I need to pull that Socratic reasoning out of my armpit and lay it on that person. But the collective good, it has to have someone to speak for it, and that person is always corrupted by that power.
I understand that if power exists, you would want to corrupt it. You would want to infiltrate it, sort of surreptitiously take the reins, and that there's always going to be people who are parasites and have kind of beta male strategies for ascending the hierarchy. I don't know if that negates the idea that that there are like nations and peoples who have this kind of interest in protecting themselves, though.
Well, sure. Listen, there is the groups of people who absolutely need to band together to protect themselves, and they should do that, but not according to mysticism, not according to a wisdom that nobody can interrogate or cross-examine, that is held by one or a small group of elites that then just have to tell you what to do, and they have this big giant ghostly club called the common good, the social good, the good of the nation, or the state.
Just a minute, gotta put some grip tape on my other stick. Gotta grip them up. Grip them up.
They can't claim some abstract social good. They've got to make a rational case in an objective sense.
Let me know if this is true. What you would want to see is a world where people are kind of atomized individuals and they don't have any kind of collective identity.
I don't think that's possible. I mean, we're a tribal species, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's possible for there to be atomized individuals. What I don't like, though, is when people say, let's say race, right? So race is a big topic in the world, of course, at the moment. There are certain, haplogroups and there are certain genetic commonalities to various different races, as I've sort of talked about for many years. So race describes objective genetic differences between different groups. That is an objective scientific metric, and those people will have something genetically in common. and they may want to work together, whether black, white, or Hispanic, or whatever. They may want to work together for their collective goals. But I don't want somebody to say, well, I represent the race, or what are in La Raza, there's an entire group of Hispanic advocacy called La Raza. I don't want somebody saying, well, I speak for the race, and you have to do what I say because of this magical concept called the race. If somebody says, well, I want to organize for blacks or Hispanics or whites or whatever, I want them to make a rational case and not have a big giant ghostly club that makes them right no matter what because they speak for the race. They just have to make a rational case for their goals or plans. It would be like if there was a court case and I said, well, I have an invisible judge who's going to tell me whether you're innocent or guilty. Like, nobody would want to design a legal system like that, right? My invisible judge friend will tell me whether you're innocent or guilty. That would be lynching or something like that, right? So you'd want to say, if there's going to be a court case, you need to have witnesses, you need to have evidence, you need to be able to confront your accusers and ask them the tough questions and cross-examine witnesses and so on. And so with Platonism, you end up with this invisible judge friend who's going to tell you what's right and wrong, and everyone else just has to kind of go along with it or fight you like crazy, which is obviously quite dangerous. So what I want is people can make the reasoned case, but they don't get a giant invisible friend that tells them that they're right, that I just have to believe or take them on in some sort of armed combat or something.
I think if I were black, I would just look for the leader, and I would be like, yeah, that's my dude. And then I would just be good to go. You know what I mean? If I were black, I would just find whatever the strongest, richest, whoever had the most watches on.
With glasses.
I'd be like, yeah, that's my boy right there. Yeah, let's do this. All right, we taking over. We good. And then I wouldn't think about it.
That's very dangerous, right? That guy, if he has the giant invisible friend called the race or the country or...
You got to rep your race.
But if somebody says, I'm right because of some giant concept that you can't question...
Is that giant concept race?
They could claim to do it in the name of race, or in the name of the nation, or in the name of a class,
yeah,
or in the name of the Democrats, or the Republicans, or the liberals, or whatever it is. So if they say, you can't cross-examine me in a rational context because I have the good of the nation on my side,
yeah,
that's just a big giant club to silence
what if they say
people.
you can cross-examine me?
Great.
Because I'm repping this race, and I'm on top, and I'm leading my race.
Then you can cross-examine them, but they can't claim to be right because of a concept, because of some abstraction that you can't question.
Well, the rightness is just like, we gots to get ours and be up there. And it doesn't, I don't know if it even matters if we're right.
As long as we eat.
Honestly, what I would say, and this is it's not a joke, I would say it don't matter if we're right as long as we eatin'.
Well, of course. I mean, that's how the animal kingdom works. That's how most of humanity works at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
However, I would say that if you take away the invisible friend that makes me right, it's a lot tougher for people to dominate others. If you take away, well, I speak for the nation, and you have to sacrifice yourself for the national good, and I know the will of the people, and nobody knows the will of the people. Nobody knows what's good for the collective, because the collective is a bunch of people who quite often disagree with each other and need to kind of reason things out. So if you take away that I speak for the nation, I speak for the group, I speak for the tribe, then it's a lot tougher to get people to do what you want, which is good.
Has anyone ever escaped that, though? I feel like the animal kingdom kind of reigns supreme, and any example that I can think of where there's been public discourse or logic, whatever the surface of the verbal surface layer of reason is, the underpinnings are always racial, group-based, animal kingdom. Has there ever been some community or upright, the type of civilization that is more in line with your ideas?
Has there been moral progress over the course of humanity, or are we just apes with spaceships, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's if we can say that there has been moral progress, then we can keep going. If there hasn't been any moral progress, then it's just a circle jerk, right? I'm just making sounds for no particular purpose.
You mean you right now?
Yeah, me for my entire career would be a complete fraud, right? Because it's like if I'm selling progress, like if I said, Sam, give me your left kidney and you'll live forever. You know, I'd be a con man selling something that I couldn't provide, right?
Okay.
So if there hasn't been moral progress in the species, then philosophy is a con, right? It's offering you something it'd be like me being a witch doctor saying I can do a particular dance, I can twerk and you'll get a monsoon. Like, I can't do that.
That's funny.
I've tried. Obviously, most people have. So if there has been moral progress, then we can keep going. And I would make the case that there has been moral progress. A couple of things that pop to mind. The end of formal slavery, actually owning other human beings like livestock, that has largely gone away. In most of the world, there are still like 15 million slaves around the world, but 80% of the world's population was enslaved in the past, and it's down now to 15 million out of how many billion, so that's some kind of progress. If you look at human history, it was like brute, close to the bone, subsistence living for almost all of our history. 100,000, 200,000 years, we got by on about $1 a day, if we were lucky.
How much of ending slavery can be attributed to Christianity?
I would say virtually all of it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it was the Quakers and the Catholics as well, and some Protestants who really made it a worldwide crusade to bring people into the dignity of free will in the image of God. And Christianity, plus the technology that came out of the scientific revolution, because there was a lot of force involved in the ending of slavery. I mean, they literally had to go and take slaves from the ships and free it. And there was a huge amount of debt. A lot of people
Slavery's pretty crazy.
It's insane.
I haven't thought about that probably since high school, but the idea, like keeping somebody in chains, that's crazy.
The fact is that I think it was 2010 that the British public finally stopped paying for slavery.
What?
They bought the slaves from a lot of slavers, and they took on a huge amount of debt, the British government, to end slavery in the 19th century.
Oh, they've been paying that debt?
They've been paying that down. I think they finally finished around 2010.
They bought them to end slavery?
Wow. They bought them out.
Well.
And so that massive sacrifice, which went on for 150 plus years for the British taxpayers, is why when people blame whites for slavery, it's the
now they're
absolute reversal of the truth.
Making London fun to live in.
Yes, it's progress. And what's the interest on that, by the way?
Oh, let's not go into those who are charging all the interest. But anyway, so I think that the end of slavery is a big progress. If you look again at the sort of economic brutality of most of human history, half of people dying before the age of 5, and the endless plagues and famines and wars, and like human lifespan was just brutal. Starting with the agricultural revolution, late 18th century, to the capitalist revolution, 19th century, human well-being and wealth has taken off. And that's, to me, significant progress, because we've had a widening of property rights and more free markets. You were going to say, I feel that inhalation.
Well, I don't know if that's how attributable that is to philosophy. The like technology, assembly lines, agricultural, the stuff that's kind of propelled the standard of living for people is, I don't know if that's attributable to philosophy.
Oh, I would make the case that it is, and I've got a whole History of Philosophers series for people on my show, which is to say that the expansion of self-ownership, which ended slavery, was also the expansion of self-ownership in terms of property rights. We own ourselves, and we own the effects of our actions, right? So I own myself, and if I make some bad argument, I own that argument. If I build a bridge, I own the bridge, because that's the effect of my actions. So the same impulse that drove Christianity to end slavery, which was you can't own yourself and be owned by another, also helped to extend property rights, so that it was the end not just of slavery, which we know more obvious in America and in the Middle East in particular, but serfdom was a big problem in both Russia and many places in Europe, where you had some private property, but you were bought and sold with the land like livestock. The rationalization and privatization of land in the agricultural revolution was the beginning of the rollout of property rights across the West, which was really the foundation for the Industrial Revolution. That all came philosophically, that all human beings should be equal in the eyes of God. All human beings should share the same rights. There aren't masters and rulers in the same way that you would have slave owners and slaves, or lords and serfs. And so that equalization had very strong roots in the Enlightenment and spread through Christianity and through the state to property rights and the end of slavery, which was the foundation, I think, of the Industrial Revolution.
It does sound like God is pretty integral to this process here. How do you kind of reconcile that with your own religious views, or lack of religious views, or however you would characterize that? Godlessness. How do you reconcile things?
Well, because if God were to give somebody a vision that says 2 and 2 make 4, that would not be wrong, right? They still need to prove it. And so if God says to people, thou shalt not steal, means everybody has property rights. Well, philosophically, there's a very strong argument, of course, that everybody does have property rights. So if correct philosophical conclusions come out of religion, that's a plus. I mean, it's the old argument for me, at least. It was like if you have an illness and there's a doctor who writes down the wrong medicine, but it turns out to be the right medicine for your illness, hey, you're happy you're cured, right?
So that's kind of, in your view, what has happened.
Philosophically, human beings have the same properties and the same characteristics. That's how we know that they're human beings and not, apes or pigs. And philosophically speaking, that's the case for self-ownership and property rights. If a religious person, if a Christian says that all human beings are equal in the eyes of God, that's for me, a poetic and quite beautiful way of saying what is philosophically true. And if Christians really work to achieve that in the world, which has been an amazing and beautiful progress in humanity, the fact that they've done a lot more good than most atheists have done means that they have an energy and emotional driving passion behind the equality that they believe all human beings have in the eyes of God. Because God being eternal, omniscient, all good, all humanity is like flat relative to the glory of God. So there's an equality there because you're so far from the perfection of God. Like in an infinite length, being taller or shorter doesn't matter. It's infinitely small. So if what to me is a poetic way of understanding the world and of humanity through religion gets to very important and core philosophical truths, I think that's a beautiful thing. In the same way that there's a lot of people who are, I think the guy who ran the Human Genome Project is a very staunch Christian. And he says, as many scientists have said, and particularly the growth of the scientific revolution, they said we are discovering the laws of God. God did not create a universe incomprehensible to man. God did not design man to have a rational faculty and to live in a rational universe and then be opposed to the exercise of reason. And so the studying of God's laws as a tribute to God has produced some amazing scientists. And the pursuit of Christian morals that happen to accord with rational morals has produced a beautiful world.
But you don't agree with the sort of the impetus for all that they've done. You don't believe in it.
Believe, it's funny, that's an interesting way to put it, and of course that is how most people put it. There's no fault in that. So I just start with a blank slate. Like, so with philosophy, you've got to just, everything you know, you got to throw out.
But what if you can intuit things and know that they're true without starting from a blank slate?
Then you have to prove that they're true. You can't just know things are true.
You have to prove that they're true?
You have to prove that they're true.
Why?
Because otherwise it's just an instinct, it could be a prejudice, it could be demonic, it could be anything.
I don't want to know that it's true badly enough to attempt to prove it.
Well, then I would say you don't trust your beliefs, because your beliefs should be provable. If they're not provable, they just remain blind prejudices.
Yeah, I would call it a blind prejudice. Is that accurate according to Catholicism?
No, they wouldn't say
it's
faith, right? It's magic.
I think, well, no, that we think that God is reasonable, and God is reason, so he can be reached with reason. And so if it's logical and reasonable, it's for a reason. Like the whole, God created a universe that could be studied and logical and comprehensible.
Yeah, it would not be a sin for a scientific Christian to study the laws of nature.
Oh yeah, no.
Because the laws of nature
It's
are
very
for the mind of God.
Catholicism, especially, they're very ordered and detailed about even canonizing saints. You know, like there's a process, you know, to all
But
that stuff.
you start from a blank slate, and you've arrived somewhere where there is no God.
Well, no, you start with there is nothing but what is and can be proved. And the is the evidence of the senses, the things that we understand in the real world through the evidence of our senses, the things that are. That is.
Why, maybe help me. Why do I bristle at that?
Why do you bristle at that?
Not in an anti-Stefan Molyneux way.
Because you're a Platonist. Because you start with abstracts and ideals as assumptions. And this is not a criticism. That's just a description of faith. And again, correct me if I go astray, but you start, and it's a beautiful thing. I mean,
Thank you.
Philosophically, it's a challenge, but it's a beautiful thing in many ways. But you start with the assumption of an ideal and of a universal and of an abstract.
Okay.
And then you derive from there, right? I mean, God exists is even more primary than existence exists.
Right.
Because
He
God
is
preceded existence, right? Like you can have a watch and you have a watchmaker. The watch is inferior to the watchmaker because the watchmaker can exist without the watch, but the watch can't exist without the watchmaker. So God is more vivid and real and true than, you know, evidence of the senses, if I understand the belief system correctly, right? So you start with the abstractions and the ideals and the perfection, and then you derive everything from that. Whereas I start with nothing other than the evidence of the senses and the reason that comes from that.
I don't know if I start with the ideals because I was an atheist up until my 20. I was a retard. I don't even think I thought about it after up until maybe 28. But I think that what I would start with is I would look at everything I know about the physical world, systems, math, just the varying layers and spheres of complexity that are all interlinked in this absurdly tight, it like defies comprehension that anything works or that anything exists. I would look at that, imagine that this sprung from nothingness or just exists somehow without some type of design, is not retarded but super retarded.
Right. Yeah.
And I would say, listen, I would
It's
also
retarded with a cape.
it's retarded with a cape, and I would also think about Richard Dawkins and evolution, and the challenges to evolution would classically were, Mr. Dawkins proved to me how a wing evolved. There's no possible way a wing could evolve, or an eyeball. There's no way that an eye could evolve. I've heard the arguments that Richard Dawkins has made for the evolution of an eye and a wing, which were it's very smart. And an eye would be light sensing tissue that has a calcified ridge that starts to grow around it, and that gives you angle, like where's the light coming from, and that forms eventually into something like a Nautilus eye where you've got a pinhole camera that actually gives you good detail. And then a wing would be like a flap of skin or something that slows your descent as you fall out of a tree, and that over time that develops into an appendage that enables you to fly. I don't think that that's like fantasy or something, but I don't think that negates the existence of God. I think that for something like that to even be possible is like flabbergasting. I feel like there's this cavalier sort of, like when people can understand the mechanism, there's this cavalier like, oh, I know how it works. It's got a thing in it. Of course, it was like that the whole time. These guys that have like 130 IQ, they don't acknowledge what comes after that, which is like, this thing is f***ing crazy. Do you realize that? Like, the thing that you accurately described it. Like, I get that you understand how it works. I know that you get quantum physics and you can have a computer that flips qubits. Like, I get that you did that. You've mastered some degree of nature here. You're not acknowledging that this is f***ing crazy.
The awe is missing. Literally,
the awe is missing.
Yeah.
It's an absurdity that these things are possible. Like Neil deGrasse Tyson, he'll be like, they do acknowledge it a little bit in a like Rick and Morty. We're physicists, of course we do magic. Like, that's how they'll acknowledge it, but I don't believe that they really understand what they're tampering with.
There's no reverence there. But can I say one thing? Because I was thinking too, like if you start with the blank slate, who made the slate?
That is good, though.
The material world, yeah. Like if you start with the material world, aren't there presuppositions in it existing in the first place?
The issue is existing to begin with, right? Right. Or is the time frame. One of the reasons that people, myself included, of course, have such trouble with evolution is we can't really comprehend 4 billion years, like how much is possible in that amount of selection pressure, because we live lifespan that is like 0.00001% of that. So the distance of time is really quite astounding what can happen over 4 billion years. Now, the issue that you had, which is a good issue, I'm giving out points here, but the issue is that existence exists in the first place.
Right.
You have that God exists in the first place, so you have no problem with things existing.
You would need a starting point. That one claims to have a starting point, which is God.
Sorry, you mean the material universe?
Right.
Would need a starting point. I mean, that's still heavily under debate. I mean, it was called the Big Bang kind of in a derogatory way. Matter can neither be created nor destroyed, only converted to energy and back. So far, matter appears to be eternal, and just has always been, and maybe it's had different forms. So saying that the problem is that existence exists, to me, adding God to that is just adding another one of those problems, which is that God exists and has always existed, and I'd rather just say reality has always existed, rather than putting in another one, which is causeless, which is God. I don't think that.
There's no way we're going to get to the end of that one. That the one seems to be. But what about, it seems weird that humankind has a proclivity to search for God and have love, which both seem not like benefits to existing or evolving. So if I love you, which I do, of course, and you die, I don't know why I'm making this us, but if we're married, let's not do this.
Come on,
If
man.
I'm married, I'm sorry.
We're
I've
gonna
been
get
waiting a
pink
long
wrench thrown
time
into the mix.
You can make an atheist argument for
love.
Love.
So pair bonding is needed for the raising of children and the transmission of culture.
If my wife dies and I mourn her the rest of my life versus just going back at it, reproducing. So it doesn't seem like reproduction is the end. It seems like it's interrupted by this weird defect of
But
love.
it's just strong pair bonding like that is like, what is it, K-type versus R-type reproductive
We have
strategies?
so much knowledge we need to transfer to children, and they take forever to grow up. Brain maturity for males is like 25. It's a quarter century. It takes a year for kids to walk. You know, foals can do it like 3 minutes after dropping out of the horse, right? So we need that pair bonding to transmit all of the information, the language, the culture, the religion, and so on, for our children to succeed in our society. So the best way to do that is to have a strong pair bonding. Now, I believe that the best pair bonding, that the true love, is our response to virtue, if we're virtuous. And that tends to be the best pair bonding, and the most reliable and safe pair bonding is if we have a man and a woman who are honest and have courage and integrity, because marriage is a vow, right? And the best way to keep a marriage is to have people who keep their word, which is a form of integrity and honesty and honor. And so love in its relationship to virtue is important. Otherwise, it is just, oxytocin pair bonding.
Those virtues, do they exist outside of the two people agreeing that those are virtues?
Yes.
So there are
Well,
like
sorry,
ultimate
they don't
virtues.
exist. Abstractions don't exist like tangibly.
They
but
exist
they
because
are
two
valid,
people agreed.
right? So if I pointed a bunch of penguins and say that's a nice forest, clearly I may need to have my eyesight adjusted or something like that, because that's incorrect.
What if the penguins are wearing leaves and branches?
So then the ayahuasca is kicked in, and I think we're beyond philosophy at that point. So, but no, I mean, I can be objectively wrong. So love, certainly you can measure it in terms of, biochemical responses and happiness, and you can measure the, release of oxytocin or dopamine within the system and so on. So you can certainly measure it, but abstractions don't exist outside the mind. That doesn't mean they're subjective.
Oh, I
if
see
you
what you're
have,
saying.
if you've got two coconuts on a table, you've got two coconuts. They're real, and you can count them. The number 1 and 2 exists in your mind. It doesn't mean it's subjective, because it's still one. You can't say there's 5 coconuts when there's only 2, or you can, but you'd be wrong.
Can we get back to the blank slate thing? You said that it's possible that matter is infinite. I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong, or whether you believe
That's
that
what
or not.
science is saying so
But it's
far,
just like
yeah.
to say like the matter is infinite. That's
Eternal.
That eternal. That's nuts.
Why? You've
Just
got
because of
eternal God. What's the difference?
awe and the heaviness of it.
Why?
To think about matter being eternal is just, it's just a heady concept. So
The bits of you and I were stars 1.5 billion years ago or whatever.
what that makes me want to ask you though is do you have a guesstimate or an idea or a notion of things like why we're here, how it started? You don't believe there's any. You've arrived at the fact that you don't believe there's anything outside of observable physical reality.
Well, anything that is outside of physical reality would be defined as not existent, right? I mean, we came down a corridor, right? We didn't try and walk through the wall because
That's
we
right.
can't, right? So we came
failed.
down a corridor, so we came where the wall wasn't, right? So there's no evidence that there's a wall there. That's how we know it's a corridor. So when you say outside of material existence, that would be the same as non-existence.
How do you think it all started?
What all started?
Material physical reality.
It's eternal.
It's eternal. Do you think there's any reason why we're here?
Well, you'll have to hate to be that annoying guy, but you'd have to define your terms. What you mean by reason why
Well,
we're
so
here.
there's the reasons why we're here. We could make up reasons on our own, like we want to collect Xbox game points. I would say that if you you've dedicated yourself to virtue. Could we say that? Would we say that?
Yeah.
Virtue and reason.
Yeah, so the general formulation is reason leads to virtue, leads to happiness.
Okay. And so is it ultimately the leading to happiness that you're interested in?
I mean, happiness is the end goal of most of our purpose, right? So, I mean, happiness is the one thing that you do. You don't do it for the sake of something else, right? So, most people, why do you get up? Well, I got to go to work. Why do you have to go to work? Well, you got to make money. Well, why do you have to make money? Well, you got to spend money, right? And when I spend money, I'm happy, or at least I'm not anxious. So happiness is the one thing in general that we do not for the sake of something else. That's sort of the end purpose or the end point.
So those are your reasons for existing. Is that accurate? Or
Well, again, tell me what you mean by reasons for existing. The reason I exist is my parents had sex.
Okay, so what I mean is you're like, could I call it the purpose of your life, or would you say that that's procreation or something like that?
No, the purpose of my life is maximum philosophy, which means do enough philosophy that you make a difference, but not so much that they just kill you, right? Because that's generally what happens to philosophers who go that little bit too far, right? So to me, the purpose is sort of maximum philosophy, which means, walking that tightrope, that balance beam of saying enough truth that you have an effect on the world, but not so much truth that you have to be taken out. Which of course Jesus and Socrates and Aristotle and Charlie Kirk, sadly, and so on, definitely happens.
Now, would you say that this is a purpose that you have created for yourself?
Yes, I have created that purpose for myself because I would say that we are the only creatures that we know of capable of even conceiving of something like meaning or purpose. Everything else is just avoiding predators, trying to have sex and eat. Right, so that's all instinctual preferences, right? The rabbit doesn't want to get eaten. It doesn't even know why. It just has a fear response and it runs. And the wolf wants to eat the rabbit because it's hungry and it thinks it's going to taste good, which it's right about. So we are the only creatures that we know that can act above animalistic preferences, sort of base hormonal evolutionary programming. And so if there is anything that means anything to a human being, it is the fact that we are capable of asking the question of what is the purpose of my life and what is the meaning of my life.
So you've created this purpose you've for yourself. Bigger picture, the purpose of reality or the reason for physical reality existing, you would say that there is none.
The purpose of existing outside of what we generate for ourselves, is that what you mean? Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm clear about what you're asking.
Not even considering ourselves or human individuals, just existence. The reason that this stuff is here, there is no reason.
There is no external reason that is like puppet stringing us. That we do have the challenge of figuring out what the purpose of our life is. And I think that the goal of philosophy is to give you a rational and moral purpose so that it's not hedonism, or so you're not lying to yourself. Not you particularly, but people as a whole.
Yeah, I wouldn't say puppet stringing, but I would just, I don't know what I'm getting at here, Rivera. You got anything?
Well, like not a puppet string, but like, you know, the like Sesame Street style where they have like a rod
Yeah,
and it does like this.
that's cool.
That's all I got.
The purpose of the blank slates, how do we know what is true? So the first thing that we do when we're little kids is we have, things like object constancy. Like you roll a ball under a couch and the baby originally just thinks it's completely disappeared. After a while, it's like goes and looks under the couch, and, your dogs with balls
Object
would do the same thing.
permanence. Yeah.
So we start with we don't know anything, and then we build up our knowledge based on the evidence of the senses. And then we end up, and this is where the God part comes into me, and I think in a very powerful way, at least for me, is that we absolutely do partake of universal, eternal, I would argue, almost divine consciousness, because we have concepts, and concepts are true forever. 2 + 2 = 4 has been true forever. Gases expand when heated is true forever, right? And you can't ever have a square circle. Something can't be both a square and a circle at the same time. That's been true forever, and I think that's where a lot of our ideas about God come from, is that we actually hook into universal consciousness that is true forever. And that's why we think that there's a consciousness out there that is
God made
universal
that.
and perfect. No, not the God made, but what Pythagorean theorem has been true since the beginning of the universe, and Pythagoras now lives forever as long as there's people talking about it.
Well, his concepts that he found that God made.
Well, but what I'm saying is that one of the reasons why we think that there's a fragment of consciousness that's out there that's perfect and eternal is we actually get to participate that alone of all of the animals. We get to participate in that eternal consciousness through the incredible power of concepts. And that is all derived from the evidence of the senses, which God does not partake in, right? We cannot find.
I thought of this creative little flourish when you mentioned corridor, like we're walking here through a corridor, that like what makes an arch or a corridor it partially the space that you can't see, and so much like anything that what isn't there and isn't visible is a part of the form of the thing that does exist materially.
Well,
And so maybe that
but the corridor is what doesn't exist materially. It's defined as the
I
absence.
walked through it fair and square.
No, but I mean, there's air there, but there's not a wall. Like, if you have an archway in a wall, you walk through that because that's where the wall isn't. So the archway is defined as that which is absent. It's a
You're
marker
walking
for
through a
something that is
concept.
absent. You are correctly identifying where the wall isn't and walking through that, which requires the evidence of the senses and the understanding that you can walk through something that is not there. And you can't walk through something that is there like a wall. So the purpose, and we haven't got to the ethics and virtue stuff, which is fine, but the purpose is to say we get absolute facts about the material universe through the evidence of the senses. We use that to extrapolate universal concepts. The purpose of a human being has to be that which is most human. That which is the most human has to be involved in our purpose. And the most human thing we can do is create universal abstractions and reason. That is the one thing that we can do that no other creature can do. And the purpose of a thing has to be what only it can do. The purpose of a guy running in a running race is to run the race the fastest. And the guy's going to win who can do it best. And we, of all the animals, of all the creatures, can take sense data and create universal abstractions, concepts, hypotheses, reasons, arguments, debates. Only we can do that. And so if there's a purpose to humanity, it has to be that which is the most essential aspect of humanity, which is our ability to conceive. Sorry.
But what if the purpose of the man running the race isn't to win? What if he wants to prove to his nagging brother that he can get off his butt and do something?
And it's still an abstract purpose.
Yeah.
It's still with not to win, but to show something to his brother, right?
Forget your bad dreams. You only need one dream. And that is the American dream.
This has been an official endorsement of MyPillow. God bless the USA.
Oh, I'm feeling a whole lot better now that we're underway with this project here.
You guys are sort of the young hotshots.
I'm just an old timer here to give you advice, Valentine. Don't end up like me, kid. It's not worth it. You gotta take care of yourself. Make the right decisions. Don't fuck up.
What about me?
You're good to go.
Nice.
All right. You guys go ahead.
All right. Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. So I'm Amber, and I wanted to ask, my boyfriend and I both have ADHD. So when neither of us is having symptoms, great. When one of us is having symptoms, the other one can kind of be supportive. But if we're both like in it, how do you like support one another and like kind of get to a place of like functioning again where you're at least like not, you know, the house isn't a mess and
What sort of symptoms do you have at the sort of height of the ADHD?
So with him, like, he's like a chameleon where like he'll have something in his hand and he's like, how did I get this in my hand? And then can't find things and like stuff like that. With me, I also, on top of the ADHD, it's like complex PTSD. So it's either going to be like kind of the anxious side, usually, of ADHD where I get a little manic, where I'm just like, yeah, we can totally like buy a 3D printer and start a 3D printing business with no experience and no marketing, or like, you know, just very like easily triggered. So like if he leaves stuff around and I feel like I'm picking up a mess and it like, you know, brings back stuff about an ex, it's like, okay.
Were your childhoods chaotic?
Yeah.
But is that where the PTSD comes from?
Partly from that. I've had one very abusive relationship and then just a few toxic ones that, yeah.
Was the first abusive relationship with your parents?
Not physically.
How so?
My mom is a recovering addict, so heroin, alcohol.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Was that from when you were very little?
Yeah.
Gosh. Was she non-functional for most of your childhood, or?
My aunt became my I guess it would be a ward, technically, of me and my brother. She did her best, but she definitely like she had her own issues as far as like she didn't necessarily want kids, so she was trying to raise one kid who was just like very hot and cold because of everything that I experienced, and then my brother was more lovey-dovey, but like still had his own issues. So
I've been talking to people about their childhoods, as you probably know, for decades. And one of the things I think that really happens, and that's a question I want to ask you, it's not so much what happens to us in our childhood that really affects us into adulthood. It's what we believe that means about ourselves. When you were going through that level of, what age were you when you were made the ward?
11.
11. So that is a long time, because, you know, the sort of childhood formation years is sort of 0 to 5. So, and then you had twice that, right? Plus, what do you think it meant about you, or what did you believe about yourself in the midst of this chaos and neglect and all of that?
I think I put a lot of responsibility on my shoulders.
Well, there was a lot of responsibility
Yeah.
on your shoulders. So what did you think it meant about you being so different from everyone else, having such a different history and home life?
I don't think I really was aware of how different it was. Like, I think the first time I hung out with somebody whose parents were still together, I was kind of surprised. And actually, I should correct
Hey, these
something.
come in pairs. I never knew that. Right?
Yeah. My mom was functioning on and off, so she'd have like periods of sobriety and then like she wouldn't. And when she wasn't sober, sometimes we'd be at my grandmother's house, but then like it was a lot.
Do you think it's possible that you perhaps experienced that if your mother loved you more, she wouldn't choose the drugs?
That was a frequent thing, yeah.
Right. So that meant that you were less lovable than her self-destructive drugs to her, which is pretty rough on the self-esteem, isn't it?
Yeah.
She's choosing self-destruction over you, which means you're lower in the hierarchy than self-destruction, which is a brutal thing to experience.
I've never thought of it that way, and that just like really resonated with me.
Yeah, tell me what do you think?
Just, I've always thought of it as just like drugs, like broad spectrum, or like the disease of addiction or whatever, but I haven't really thought about it as like self-destructiveness of being below something like so utterly toxic to it's like, okay, no wonder I feel like I'm a dumpster fire.
Yeah, like there's the sewers, which are bad, and then there's me even below that. And I say this, you know, with sympathy,
Yeah.
because my mother chose delusions over me. And I knew that her delusions were self-destructive. I knew that the things that she believed were self-destructive, and she just went back to them. Insists she was an addict to lies. In a way, I guess that your mother was addict to drugs and things. And so when your mother chooses self-destructive lies, or in this case, self-destructive drugs over you, it means, I mean, from my experience was like, why wouldn't you just choose me? Like, I'm a fun kid, I'm a good kid, I'm an enjoyable person to spend time with. Why would you go back to that deadly well over and over again, abandoning me when I'm like fresh water, so to speak, right? And that's so confusing for kids as to why adults are setting themselves on fire rather than hugging their children. And I think that has a real impact on just our entire sense of how we feel about ourselves and whether we're worth anything to anyone. Because if the person who gave us birth is choosing self-destruction over us, how is it possible to have a good relationship with ourselves as children, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
Was it ever explained to you why she would do this?
I think she had something happen to her when she was a kid. I'm not really sure. Basically, I guess she, like as a teenager, she started partying and she like just on and off never stopped. Like, and again, she tries, like she still tries. She's had a pretty good stint of sobriety of late, which is like good to see. But it definitely, it was, I think, harder when she was younger. Maybe it's getting easier and more mellow with age. I don't know.
In general, people are not addicts because they want to feel good. They're addicts because they don't want to feel like hell. So the general way that it works is people like, let's say you have a happiness level of 100. No, like average people, you know, you're up and down a bit, but you kind of center around 100. The problem is that addicts have a happiness of minus 50. Like they're just miserable and wretched. And then what they do is they take drugs because they're, what have I got to lose? I feel miserable and wretched, right? And for the first time in their life, they're like, oh my God, I'm not in pain. Oh, this is close to what normal people feel like. But then they crash and they're now no longer at minus 50, they're at like minus 70. So then they take the drug and they get to plus 60. That's the cycle that happens. And usually it comes from absolutely appalling early trauma. My mother's addiction to delusions came because she was a war baby, Second World War, Germany. I mean, just, I'm sure she was raped half into oblivion as a child, and sexual abuse is a lot of the foundation for why people do drugs. And maybe that's what was happening with your mother, but it is self-medication for horrendous amounts of early trauma. And it is to your credit that you have some ADHD, you have some PTSD, as you say, but that you're not a drug addict, that you're not an alcoholic, that you're not, you know, a gambling addict or a sex addict or something like that. To your massive and absolute and amazing credit. It's a wonderful survival. And the reason I'm sort of asking all of this, I think that ADHD comes out of a certain inability to feel centered and at peace with yourself. And that's why I was sort of asking about the childhood, because we distract ourselves. You ever go to the dentist and they have the TV up there and you get really fascinated by like daytime soap operas because you're waiting for that, you know, this, please don't have a problem with my gums or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So we tend to want to distract ourselves when we're discontented. Not necessarily when we're unhappy, because sadness can be a rich and fine experience and all of that, but when we're jangled and discontented and negative about ourselves, we tend to want to distract ourselves. And I think that ADHD sometimes has a sort of essential component to do with we're dancing on Lego bits or thorns or something like that. And that's why I think the childhood stuff is really important. And you said you had these, I think you said 2 toxic relationships in the past, which I think would have to do with the feeling that you were such a negative that your mother continued to choose drugs. That her, if you had been more lovable, or if you had been more positive for your mother, that she would have turned away from that devil and towards you. Because when you have parents who are really dysfunctional, you become this crazy wooing person. You try to woo them, don't you? You try to woo them back. Come, Mom, have fun. Come on, let's play a game. Come on, Mom, let's do something fun. Let's go for a walk. And you're constantly in this state of trying to woo someone back from a cliff edge or back from something really self-destructive. And that's the only thing you can do as a kid, right? You what else can you do? You can't stop her from doing it, but you can always try to woo her back and woo her back and woo her back. That gives you a sense of will and control, but the problem is it comes at a great personal cost of self-esteem, because you're saying, I can do something to stop Mom from doing the drugs. I can do something to stop my mother from going mad. It gives you a sense of control, which is illusory, but it comes at great cost, because then you fail, and you fail, and you fail, and you fail. And I think that's brutal on the self-esteem and the sense of ease and comfort within yourself, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So sorry for the big long yap, but does that does that capture anything about what happened?
No, that definitely makes sense. When she was around, like, she was very present. That's the weird thing about it. But when she would relapse, it was like, all right, going to grandma's house or whatever,
But that would mean something to you, though, the relapse, because if in a sense you are partly responsible for keeping her sober when she relapses, that's a rejection of you, isn't it? What do you think that felt like, if that's a reasonable way to approach it?
Probably, like, if that's like the echo of what I felt in the one really abusive relationship, probably just this sense of like utter, like, why can't you just love me?
Right. What's the answer? Why can't you just love me? What's the answer that you have in your head as to why you can't be loved?
The answer that I like now after years of healing, or just
What did you have at the time? Why couldn't you be loved?
at the time I thought there was something wrong with me.
Okay, and what was wrong with you that you couldn't be loved?
I don't know.
Sure you do. Everybody has a thesis. I mean, it may not, I'm not saying you're lying, but it may not be present in your mind, but there's something about you that was negative for your mother in this. I'm not saying objectively, of course, right? You were just a victim, but we all have to make reasons why things happen to us happen. That's what we do as human beings, and particularly as children. There has to be a reason why, and the reason is always, what can I do? Because if at 5 or 6 or 7 you'd have said, well, I have no control over my mother, she's going to go back to drugs, my life is going to be hell and chaotic, you just wouldn't have been able to get out of bed. You have to give yourself a mission. You have to give yourself some control, some power. Like the people who live at the bottom of a volcano who can't leave. They imagine some dance is going to appease the volcano god. Like, they have to make up something. Can you imagine a child who could have, because you were trying at that every time, could you imagine a child who could have saved your mother?
No.
At the time, could you imagine? Back then?
I wanted to. I didn't really know how, but
What did you try?
it's where like the OCD came in. It was one of those, like, she would go out and use drugs, and I had this one very erratic